Hello. In this lesson, we're going to look at converting percents, fractions, and decimals. So, we're going to start with 1, which is 29%. Now, percent means 100ths. So, what I recommend doing here is rewriting this as 29 over 100. So that over 100, so 1 over 100, this is percent. We just write it as a percent instead of the over 100. So 29% is 29 over 100. Well, there's our D is the answer for this one. Now for 3, we have a fraction that we need to convert either to a decimal or a percent, whichever one is correct. So what we're going to do, there's a couple of ways of doing it. I just recommend taking a calculator and dividing 2 divided by 5, and that is 0.4. So that is 0.4, which means that A is our answer here in this case. Now, what we could have done another way without a calculator is we would need to get the bottom part, the 5, to a 100. And we could do that by 2 over 5 multiplying both sides. 5 times 20 is a 100. So we would make the denominator, the bottom, 100. So 2 times 20 is 40, and 5 times 20 is 100. But now notice that when we have, so this would be a fraction, and when we are dividing by 100 and we need to make it into a decimal, what happens is we have the 40. Its decimal point is here. We don't write it because we know that it is after that 0. So what we would do is move the decimal 1, 2 to the left. Because we are dividing by 100, we have 2 zeros in the 100, so we move it 2 to the left. And that's how we would get the 0.4 as well. If we're dividing by a 10, we would move it, because 10 has only 1 0, we would move it 1 to the left. If we were dividing by 1,000, 1,000 has 3 zeros, we would move the decimal point 3 to the left. So we're moving it 2 to the left from this 40, and that's how we would get the 0.4, the same thing as we have here. Okay, and actually I'm kind of skipping around, I guess. I didn't realize that this was number 2. So let's go on to number 2 then. 0.3. So when we have a decimal, and so here our options are 3 over 100, 25%, 3 over 10, and 50%. Well, we can cross out this 25% and 50%. There is no way we get a 25 or a 50 from a 3. Since it is 0.3, if these are not possible. So now we need to figure out which one is it. Is it 3 over 100 or 3 over 10? Well, just like what we did here, what we're going to do is we're actually moving the decimal point to the other way. So we're moving it to the right, and we're moving it only one place, which means that now we can rewrite it as 3. And since we moved it one place, it is 10. So we moved it to the other side than what we did here, where we wanted to move it to the left. So this the answer is 3 over 10. And you can always double check it with a calculator. 3 divided by 10 equals 0.3. So depending on how many times we move the decimal point, depends on how many zeros we have under here. But this is also, if you read it as a decimal, it's 3/10, which means that the 10 goes under. 3/10. Just like this one is 40 hundredths. Okay, number 4 is 51%. So again, we have different options. Well, remember that the percent is over 100. So it can't be 20 and it can't be 10 because we have it's 51%. This 51% or 51 over 10 would be 5.1, which would actually be, or it would be 510% instead of this. So it would need to be, if this was a decimal, it would need to be 51 over 100. Well, now we have that 100 and we can move the decimal. We can move it from here as well. We don't need to rewrite this. We can just, we know that the decimal is here. And since the percent is over 100, we move it 2 to the left. So we get 0.51. And if you're not sure, again, you can put this in a calculator. 51 divided by 100, you get 0.51. And you don't need to write this step in between. You can just move the decimal 2 to the left. So we're dividing by 100. 51 divided by 100. Okay, number 5, 43%. Again, 43%, so means that we are dividing it by 100. We can move this decimal point 2 to the left and get 0.43, which is this answer here. Number 6, 3/4. Now, what we can do is, again, we can just put this in a calculator and do 3 over 4, which is 0.75. Well, we don't have a 0.75. We have a 7.5 and we have a 0.075. So neither one of these are correct. If we look at this, so it is 0.75. And now we would need to move it to or make it a percentage. When we are going from a decimal to a percent, we multiply by 100. So we would multiply this by 100 and we get 75, and do not forget that percent. So 75%. Another way is to, since we are multiplying by 100, is we're moving that decimal point 2 to the right. So when we are going from decimal to percent, we are multiplying by 100, or we are moving the decimal to the right by 2. When we are going from a percent to a decimal, we are dividing by 100 or moving the decimal point 2 to the left. Okay, let's look at number 7. So we have 1.5. Now, here we go. We have all these different, we have 2 percentages, and we have 3 over 2 and 3.5. Now, if we look at this number 1.5, well, if it was a percent, it would be, we would go from decimal to percent, so we would multiply by 100. So in order to, or this would be 150%. So these can't be correct answers. Now, 1.5 is more than 1. So that means that if we're talking about a fraction, the numerator, the top, has to be greater than the denominator, the bottom. So if we look at 3 and 5, well, 3 is less than 5. It can't be this. Since we have a 1 point something, the numerator has to be greater than the denominator. Now we can take a calculator and double check it. 3 divided by 2 is 1.5. So this is our answer. Okay, number 8. So what are we doing here again? We are trying to figure out which one is correct. So what I would do is I would rewrite this as a fraction first. So 27 divided by 100. Well, there's your answer. So if you have not yet done so, I highly recommend pausing the video and trying these on your own, and then, coming back and seeing if what you got is correct. So let's move on. I'm going to move on. 17 divided by 10. So now what I'm going to do, so this is 17 divided by 10, which means that it is not 100. So we can't just write this as a percent. There's two options. We can multiply this by a 10, and we would have to do both the numerator and the denominator, and rewrite it as 170 over 100. Well, now we have that 1 over 100, so now we can rewrite it as a percent, 170%. Well, there's our answer. So we don't even have to go any farther. That's it. So what we did is made this into hundredths. So multiplied both by a 10. Because what we do to the bottom, we have to do to the top as well. Okay, next, 0.1. Well, if we look at, it can't be 3 over 10 because that we have the 1. There's no way. Now, if we start looking at this and we want to, if we want to make it into a percent, decimal to percent means that we are multiplying it by 100, moving the decimal point 2 to the right. So 0.1, moving the decimal point 2 to the right means that we would put 1 0 here. And this would be 10%. So there's your 10%. Okay, number 11, 88%. Well, we can see what happens when we just move the decimal point 2 to the left. 1 2. We get 0.88. And remember, we're dropping that percent sign when we do that because we've already divided by 100. So we've used it. So 0.88, here's our answer. 12. 1 over 2. That's a half. So a half, you might know, or if you don't, then, a half is the same thing as 50% of something. 1 is 100%. So this one is a 50%. Well, at the same time, if we do, you can do it on the calculator. We know that a half can be written as a decimal with 0.5. If you're not sure about it, then do it with the calculator. But a half, this is the same thing. And as a percentage, it would be 50%. Okay, number 13, we have 0.5. And we need to figure out, well, what did we just do? We had a 0.5 here, and it was a half. So they made this one easy. A little bit too easy, I guess. Because, yeah, there's your answer. So 0.5 is always a half. 0.5 is always 50%. This is the same thing as 50%. We can move the decimal 2 to the right. We add a 0 in between, and then we have that. Okay, number 14, the last one. Let's rewrite this as a fraction. So 7, and remember percent is the same thing as over 100. So there is our answer. Okay, again, just like before, if you have any questions about this, please do not hesitate to email me. Bye.